Hello, everyone, and welcome to the March 2026 Legal Hour. My name is Elizabeth McCree, and I apologize for being a few minutes late getting on today. Well, about half an hour late getting on today. But as you all know, if you saw the promotion for this particular legal hour, this is a difficult day for me. This is the 1 year anniversary of my father's passing. But I wanted to do the legal hour today because, I wanted to be able to talk about some of the things. I've been doing probate and estate planning law for over 10 years now, even longer than that, really. Um, and I wanted to give some of the tips that I've learned in the past year and a half in dealing with my mother and dealing with my father, that, I would not have known unless I have dealt with it myself, and not as a person who is drafting documents or dealing in court, but as a client, my own client. And so I thought that today would be a good opportunity to be able to discuss some of those different things, because I see things very differently now in the past year and a half than I might have saw them before when I was drafting documents. So that's really the purpose of today. I'm going to give you some tips and some tricks that are not all legal stuff, but just like some things to be able to get through. Some of it will be legal stuff because, of course, this is the legal hour. As always, this is not an attorney-client relationship. This is for educational purposes only, but these are things that over the last year and a half have really helped me be able to deal. Number one is the power of attorney for my mother, and then also as the power of attorney, and then the personal representative of my dad's estate. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. If you're watching live and you have comments or questions, please put them into the chat, either on YouTube or on Facebook. It should be live on both Facebook and YouTube right now. I was looking to see. I think I am live on Facebook now. If you have questions after the fact, please put them in. I will address questions that come up after the fact. Again, these experiences for me are happening in Michigan. I think some of the tips may be helpful for anybody, but these are things that deal specifically with Michigan law, because that's the law that I have been dealing with in taking care of my mother and my father. So for those who don't know, my mother, first she had knee surgery in June of 2024. So that was the first part of what really brought me having to be able to assist her with certain things when she was in the hospital and things of that nature. And before she had the knee surgery, one of the first things that they asked, and especially since we did that knee surgery outside of the hospital system that is local to us, was for her documents, like a medical power of attorney. And I am that person and have been that person. And so she had that in June of 2024. But then in November of 2024, she had a stroke. My mother is doing well. We just celebrated her 80th birthday this past November. I actually had to take her to the hospital on her birthday in 2024, on her 79th birthday. So she will never let me forget that I took her out to eat first, but I knew something was wrong. And so we had to go to the hospital after that. Then in March of 2025, everybody, all my family was telling me, you've been taking very good care of your mother. You already had this vacation planned. You should take a vacation. You should go on the trip. But my father was sick. He had a cough, and my dad never got sick. And he was helping me with my mom. And he took my mom to go get her hair done. And my mom called me and said, your father is not feeling well, and you know he does not get sick. You need to check on him. And so I said, Dad, do I need to make you go to the hospital? I'll stay from this vacation. He said, no, go on your vacation. And I was on my vacation when I found out that my dad was sick and had been taken to the hospital. And that was on a Saturday. And then unfortunately, by the next Saturday, he had passed away. We found out that he had end-stage pancreatic cancer, but he did not know that. I have learned now that that is something that is not infrequent with that type of cancer. But, there were other things that happened in regards to what sent him to the hospital. And very unexpected, tragic, and sad, yesterday, I found out that my cousin Janaea passed. She was 44 years old and also got sick just like my dad did, pneumonia. So that's the first thing. There's a lot of different things going on right now. COVID is still out there with us, flu, different things. But, if you're not feeling well, get it checked out. And if you are a person who has been designated as a medical power of attorney or your child, a spouse, don't let somebody, say, oh, I'll be fine in a couple of days, things of that nature. It's just, there's too much going on right now. So that's my first tip that doesn't really necessarily have anything to do with the practice of law. Make sure that if you are not feeling well, that you're getting checked out and getting care. I am an only child. So, when I drafted both of my parents' estate plans. Um, uh, I finally got my dad to do one a few years after I came back home and opened my office. And so, it really wasn't even a question. It wasn't a discussion. It was, Beth, you're going to be doing everything for both of us. And, but I want you all to have the discussion, because one of the things that I have learned in this past year and a half is, I do it. I'm doing my job as a caretaker, as an executor of the estate, a personal representative. It is not easy at all. And this is from somebody who literally does this every day for other people. But when it's I still remember the feeling when I took my dad's probate paperwork up to the court and filed it. I'm an empath. I'm an emotional person. So even when I'm filing other people's paperwork, I still have a sense of, when I go and get their death certificates and do all the different things, I do have feelings, but the doing it for my own father and having to sign the paperwork, not as the attorney, but as the petitioner, it was a lot. So it gives me a little bit more to know when I'm dealing with folks, that there is an emotional aspect to this. And I think that I always have done that as a probate attorney, as an estate planning attorney. But the other thing that I tell people all the time when I do estate planning for them and I'm helping them draft their documents is you're going to have a weight lifted off your shoulder once you do it. And I said that because people have always said that to me. Hadn't felt it really myself. I had done my own documents. But I was sitting in the hospital with my mom after her stroke. And I thought about it and I said, my mom is my decision maker currently on my documents, and she's not able to do that right now. And so I was literally in the hospital when I typed an email to my best friend and some of my other friends. And I said, hey, I'm redoing my documents and this is what I want. And I want you all to serve in that capacity. Are you willing? Because you have to ask people. I've had clients who come in and just say, my child's going to do it. My spouse is going to do it. Have the conversation. It's really important to have the conversation. Because if I had had the jobs that I had had before, my mom had a surgery when I was an assistant prosecutor in Muskegon, and it did not go well. And I was off of work and down here in this area for a couple of days. And finally, my mom said, you have to go back to work or you're going to lose your job. And while they were understanding of the fact that my mother was having some issues, at the same time, jobs have to keep going on. So when I went back, I didn't feel like I was ready to go back. And then when I came back home to check on my mother, she was not doing well and had to be readmitted to the hospital. And I always had felt bad about that because I said, if I had just stayed here and, this was pre-COVID, now I could have said, I'll work from home, I'll do Zoom, whatever the case may be, potentially. But now having my own law firm, I have much more flexibility. So if you have a oldest child or a spouse who you're like, yeah, they can handle everything, but they also have a job where they fly every week for work. That might not be the person to be able to make a decision when something happens and you know that you're going to need somebody to be able to make a decision quickly. So when I tell people, don't just assume that people are going to want to do that job for you. You need to talk to them. At the same time, the person who you're being asked, know yourself, know your schedule. If this had happened 10 years ago when I was working for other people or working as an assistant prosecutor full time, I would not have been able to do for my mother and my father what I'm doing now. I have much more flexibility as being my own business owner. And so those are things you have to think about if your children live in a different state or, different things of that nature of who you're thinking about. It's not just you're the only child, you have to do it. You're the oldest child that you have to do it. You really need to be thinking about what that person's life circumstance is. I don't have children. I own my own business. I moved back home, so I was closer to both of my parents. All of those things make it easier for me to serve in those capacities. But I know that 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to. And it wasn't anything about my ability to serve in those positions. I just would not have been able to because of my job. Even when I moved closer, I still wouldn't have been able to do exactly what I needed to do and be available. So those are things that you do need to think about. The other thing is to know yourself. It's been a struggle, but I have OCD. I have had routines my entire life. I do my morning routine the same way every day. The reason that I do that is because if I don't do that, I'm going to forget something. So the routines are helpful. The routines are calming. The routines help me not to have anxiety and those different things. So when I go and I do my mother's medication routine, um, I have to do it in the same way every single time. If I get thrown off, then something might not be right. And more than anything, I want to make sure that my mother does not get harmed or hurt in any way from something that I have done. My mom hates it. She does not like the routine, but I have to do it the same way every time in order for me to know that it's been done right. I'm that person. I have to touch doorknobs all my life. I mean, my mother and my aunt used to make fun of me because I used to not like my food to touch. Those were very early signs at 3, 4, 5 years old of my OCD. And that's gotten a little bit better. The rest of it has not. Because with all the anxiety that I've been dealing with everything in the last year and a half, it makes some of those things worse. So that's one thing that I finally had to sit down to my mother and say, these are things that I've been doing all my life. I've lived on my own since I was 21. So you might not have known that I do this every day when I take care of myself or take my own medications or whatever the case may be. But this is how it's going to be. And so those are things that you have to think about. I think with spouses, you probably are used to your spouse's routine, but parents and children, you may learn that, your kids or your parents are a little different than when you all were growing up or living in the same house or whatever the case may be. And so those are some things that might take some getting used to if you're serving as a caretaker. Or even, you have siblings and the siblings are working together in regards to helping a parent or something of that nature. Your siblings, so you all might not have the same personality. There's going to be quirks and different things that have probably only been exacerbated since you all were growing up together. Or you might not have even grown up in the same house together or at the same time together. There might be a big age gap. You've got to learn your loved ones' idiosyncrasies, and sometimes you're going to have to deal with certain things. So, hopefully now we just had the discussion this week. My mom knows this is my routine when I come in to do the medicine. And if I don't do it this way, then it's going to mess me up for the whole day. So just help me and go along with the routine. She's probably still not going to do it. But, those are different things that you have to know about yourself and about your loved ones in order to be able to work well when this situation does come out. I think I've talked about this before. I think I've shown them before. But I started doing this when I started doing estate planning, and I'm really thankful that I did it. And I'm going to tell you how it ended up becoming important for me. So this purple folder is my mom's estate planning documents. And the blue folder, I took the top off of because now I'm using it for his probate case, was my dad's estate planning folder. So I always make my estate planning folders when I complete them and then I give them to people a different color. They're not going to be black, white, or gray. So I have blue, green, yellow, purple, all the different colors. And when somebody comes in and does their estate planning, I have them pick a color. And I say, this is going to be important because if something happens, then your family can say, go get the yellow folder, go get the green folder. And then they'll know where it is, and you can put other stuff in there. And, I tell people, I give them things that they can write out what they want their service to be like. That does come from personal experience because when my Aunt Gwen passed, when I was a teenager, she had written out everything that she wanted for her service. But my mother and my uncle didn't find it at first. But they had the discussions and they knew what she wanted. And so they found it later on, and they still did the services almost exactly what my aunt would have wanted because they had the discussions. But for people who haven't had those discussions or still thinking about what they want to do, I have a sheet that I have called Final Matters that say, I want to be cremated, buried. I want these songs sung at my service. I want these people to serve as pallbearers. You can fill that out or not, but I always include it for people. And, I tell them, tell the kids it's the orange folder, the blue folder, the purple folder, the green folder. So when my mother had the stroke, I also had all their documents saved in the cloud. So when I took her to the hospital and they told us that she had a stroke and that she was being admitted, I had already given the medical power of attorney to the hospital, and the hospital had it in their records. But when I went to her house, after my uncle got there and I was able to go and get some things because I stayed at the hospital the whole time that she was there, I was able to find her purple folder. And that had all of the documents in there that I needed. And so then I was able to have that, and I still have it because I still do power of attorney stuff for her. For my dad, I was on vacation when he got taken to the hospital, but I had already had his documents done as well. I had made sure that his doctors knew he was with the VA, so the VA didn't have a copy of it, but Corwell did. And so they were able to talk to me even while I was sitting in the middle of a cruise ship trying to get to the port so that I could get on a plane and get home. But then when I got to the hospital and I got into the room and was able to sit and talk with my dad, and figure out the lay of the land and everything that was going on, and my dad told me he wanted to go home because he wanted to go home. I said, okay. And then I said, Dad, where's the blue folder? Because I knew my dad's folder was blue. And he was able to tell me exactly in the house where the folder was. And so I went to his home, and I went to where he told me it was, and my dad's blue folder was there. And I am so thankful that my dad listened to my instructions. My mom didn't listen to all my instructions with her book. But my dad had put life insurance policy in that folder, car title, deed to the house, statements from the bank and the, mortgage company. He had put everything in that folder. I literally had everything I needed in the blue folder. And so asking him where it was, and he was able to tell me directly where it was. And if he hadn't been able to tell me, if there had been a situation where he hadn't been able to tell me, I knew that the blue folder was somewhere in the house. So that is one thing that I'm thankful that I have always done in my estate planning and that I will always do. But when I give people that folder, or if you had your estate planning documents done, go get a folder that is a different color than black, gray, or white, and put a cover on it and let them know that it's estate planning documents like I have here. And this is what I always do for folks. So this is my mother's, and it includes everything here. For people that I do mine for, I also then have my contact information to be able to get in contact with me if there are questions. I had a client who was a longstanding deacon at the church where I grew up, who was a great, amazing man. And none of his family lived here. So they actually called me when he was in the hospital right before he passed. And I came to the hospital, and because, my church family is my family. And so I was there, and I was able to help his family, let them know. I informed the funeral home the information for the death certificate. Those are things that you have to do. And so I had done that before for clients. I've been there and watched other people do it. Um, that was one of the hardest parts, giving the information for the death certificate. You have to have the person's parents' name, where they were born, their occupation, social security number. You have to have all that information when that happens. And if that document is wrong, then it's going to be really difficult to do anything else that you need to do. So everything that would need to be included in that should be in your binder or your folder, so that people are able to do that in a situation that oftentimes is very stressful and traumatic. But it's not their fault. They have to get the information in order to be able to make sure that a death certificate is done correctly, make sure that the names are spelled right, all those different things. So you want to make sure that that is done properly. Power of attorney. This has probably been the most annoying part of having a lived experience as opposed to somebody drafting the documents. I knew that there were issues with powers of attorney in Michigan. In Michigan, you have two different types of power of attorney. So for power of attorney, we're talking really about financial powers, paying the mortgage, paying bills, all the financial stuff that comes along when somebody is not able to make those decisions for themselves. Um, the two different types in Michigan that you have is that you have one that is only effective on disability. So you have to have a determination by two doctors that somebody is not able to make decisions by themselves before a durable power of attorney goes into effect. Then you also have one that is effective immediately. I do those for estate planning clients sometimes when the person is a little bit older. They might not drive anymore. Their child has already been taking care of their bank accounts and business for them. And so they're like, I just want them to be able to do it now. I want them to be able to go pay all my bills now. I want them to be able to do everything now. So I just want it effective right now. I don't have any issue with it being effective now. So you have the ones that are effective immediately upon signing, and then you have the ones that are only effective on disability. So if somebody is temporarily not able to make decisions, but then later on is able to make decisions, then that person is not serving in the role of the power of attorney until that person is determined to not be able to make the decisions on their own at that point. So I had to deal with the power of attorney for both my mother and my father. After my mother had the stroke, I had the doctor's notes, and I had the letters from the doctors that she had had the stroke, was not able to make decisions for herself. I went to the bank, which is also my bank, and I sat down with the banker because I'm already on most of my mother's accounts, but she had some accounts, credit cards accounts that my name was not on. And so I needed to access that information to make sure that all her bills were getting paid. And the woman, the banker who sat down with me, she said she started to, and I saw her as she was asking me questions, reaching for a card for that will and trust place, which is one of these online companies that does, wills and trusts and has now partnerships with a lot of different banks. And so then she looked at the documents and she didn't really review them all the way. She just kind of looked at them, verified that my mom's name was on them. And then she said, well, did a Michigan attorney draft these documents? And I just said, yes. And she said, okay. And then she started to read through. And then she looked at the bottom and saw that it was drafted by me. And I said, I'm a Michigan attorney and I'm an estate planning attorney. I drafted these documents. That stopped the conversation. She put the card back. And by the end, she was asking for my card because she wanted to do estate planning documents herself. So I say that to say that a lot of the banks are now pushing services for will and trust that are done in partnership with some of LegalZoom or Will and Trust or some of these different organizations. I don't necessarily have anything against those organizations, but what they don't want is documents that you have pulled off the internet yourself with no assistance and have filled out, because there are a lot of issues with those. Even if they get notarized, most notaries are not attorneys. So they're not going to be able to give you legal advice. They can notarize a document, make sure everybody's, but they're not going to be able to tell you, oh, that this is actually a Indiana will and not a Michigan will, or this is a California will and not a Florida will. They're not really supposed to be giving you legal advice of that nature. That's not the job of a notary. So if you have questions about things, or you go to start filling those out, and just a regular statutory will doesn't work for you because you have different circumstances, then and you don't have a trusted attorney that you want to go to for estate planning or whatever the case may be, and you go to the bank and they give you these products. I'm not saying that they can't work for people. Most of the time, somebody has a situation where that's not going to work. You don't want to just go and fill out and do your own ladybird deed and give your house to your daughter who's in the middle of a super messy divorce. And now all of a sudden, her husband in the middle of divorce is going to try to take your house because it's her property. You need to go through and talk to an attorney if you have different situations like that going on. But after the banker at my own bank determined that I had drafted the documents for my mother, and that they were in line and proper, then I didn't have any issues. For my dad, I was working. He was in the hospital for about 3 or 4 days before he came home, and then he passed a few days after that. I was working to get things set up because I didn't know, I knew that he didn't have long probably, but I wanted there to be care for him. I wanted, different things to be done to take care of his home, make sure his bills were getting paid. My dad he had paid like all of the months prior's bill before then. He was very particular about payments. But I didn't know how long that this was going to be. So I wanted to be able to have access. So I took the power of attorney to my dad's bank. My dad's bank is not a bank that I have that much of a relationship with or have any accounts at. So before that happened, I asked the doctors at the hospital to sign the form that said that my dad was not able to make decisions for himself. One of the doctors signed, and I left it for another doctor because you have to have 2 doctor signatures. In Michigan, it is only effectuated if you have a durable power of attorney if 2 doctors sign. And also you have the medical directive, the medical power of attorney, and you have the durable power of attorney for financial. So a lot of doctors may be familiar with the medical directive, but not with the durable power of attorney. And that is what I learned. So I left it for a doctor. I had to go and make an appointment with the VA, who was very helpful, by the way. The social worker at the VA was amazing during the period of time before my father passed. And so I actually had to just walk in there one day because, you can't really get anybody on the phone. But when I walked in, they set me up with an appointment with the social worker. And the aides that I had come to the house once my dad came home were covered, almost 60% of it, by the VA in the end. So I was very thankful for that. But when I took the power of attorney to the bank, my dad's bank, they did the same thing. Did a Michigan attorney draft this? Yes, I did. And I had rushed over there, so I had the paperwork from the hospital, but the second doctor crossed out the first doctor's signature because they had switched like attendings. And so the other attending had like 3 or 4 days off. So the new one came in, and instead of signing on the second line, they crossed out the first name and wrote the second name. I didn't notice this until I got to the bank. So of course the bank then sent it to their, back office, and they said, well, this document saying that your dad is not able to make decisions for himself is not properly signed, so we can't give you access to the account. And so then, I was worried about, because my dad paid everything with like cash, basically. And so, but I couldn't worry about it then. At that point, I had to get my dad home. But I would have had to go back another time and try to figure that out with the bank. And so it's important for people to know if they're in that situation and it comes as a, kind of rush or surprise or something of that nature, that you're going to have to walk the banks through. I recently asked the probate court in Berrien County to add language to guardianship orders, because if you don't have a power of attorney or a medical directive, then you might have to go to the probate court and ask for guardianship. And a lot of people who were getting guardianship for their parents or spouses or things of that nature, and then they were trying to go to the bank to get documents in order to do Medicare or Medicaid applications, get them into skilled nursing care, things of that nature, were facing an issue where the banks were saying, this paper doesn't give you the right. So I just asked them to put in 2 or 3 sentences. Thank you to Jessica Brown, who's the probate registrar in Berrien County, who drafted the language and added that to all guardianship forms now that come out of Berrien County. And just this week, I had somebody text me and say, the bank won't give me statements. I said, refer them to that language that has now been added to the guardianship letters. And she called the bank back and told them where that language was. They saw it, and the issue got fixed in just a few minutes, as opposed to 3 and 4 visits to the bank. And so I figured that out and asked for that language after having to deal with it myself. And that's not something that I had thought about or had experienced in drafting the documents. And so sometimes you have to go through the experience to know what it is that needs to be done. But again, the Berrien County Trial Court now added that language, and we already see that it is making an impact. But many of the banks are national banks, and so they don't always understand different states have different documents, and different states have different requirements. And your frontline banker, not even just a teller, but your frontline banker doesn't always know what it's supposed to say. And so they have to send it to their legal department in order to verify it. And that can sometimes slow you down. So having a good estate planner to help you draft the documents, because I have had to call banks and be like, look at page 4, stop, these people are in the middle of distress. Like, look at page 4. It says exactly what it needs in order to get this account open or be able to access this account for Medicare and Medicaid. And then they'll say, oh, okay, that makes sense. But a lot of the bankers don't know all of this stuff, which is why they have been now told to push these products, because with a partnership with Will and Trust or LegalZoom, then they get a document that they like as the bank. But you have to use that for a whole lot more than just that one bank. So again, I'm not against the companies, but if you have very specific situations, you still need to work with the good estate planner. And the reason that they do that is to avoid people who just print the documents off of the computer. But that also is then making it more difficult for people who are, dealing with issues with documents that an attorney has drafted. And especially if you are a child trying to help your parent and you live in Texas and they live in Michigan, you're going to need to have those documents and be able to do what you need to do. And you're not always going to be able to run back and forth to the bank 4 or 5 times. So you need to make sure that the language is right in the beginning. Let's see. I've got a question here. Hello, Brenda. So Brenda asks, so I don't need a power of attorney when I have guardianship. Great question. So in this situation in Michigan, again, if somebody has the capacity, they can do a medical directive and they can do a power of attorney. If somebody doesn't already have those documents and is not in the position where they are able to do those documents because they're mentally not able to do that, then you would have to go to the probate court in order to get guardianship. And if you wanted to be able to deal with the money, you would get conservatorship. Again, this is for Michigan. So if you have court-ordered guardianship or conservatorship for someone already, adult or child, you do not then need a power of attorney. On the reverse, on the flip side, if somebody has a power of attorney, then you can use that to get a guardianship or conservatorship, but you don't have to. So this is another issue that happens with the banks. Somebody will bring in a power of attorney and they'll say, you need a letter of guardianship. Or somebody will bring in small estate paperwork after somebody passes away, and the bank or someone of that nature will say, you need a letter of authority and showing that you're the executor of the estate. That's because that's what their legal department has shown them. A small estate paperwork does not require a personal representative's paperwork. It's a 2-page document that the judge signs in Michigan. If you have an estate that is underneath the threshold, you don't have to have a letter of a letter of authority for personal representative. But they're just asking you for the documents that their back office has told them. So sometimes you are going to need that attorney to call and say, this letter of guardianship is fine, or this power of attorney is fine. You don't need both. The whole point of having powers of attorney and medical directives are so that you don't have to go to the probate court and get guardianship or conservatorship, and vice versa. If you have to go to the court to get it, then the person can't sign the documentation in order to give it to you. You don't need both. Guardianship and conservatorship are good through someone's life, just like a medical directive or a power of attorney are. As soon as that person passes away, though, then you need the will. Then you have to become personal representative or executor. So for my father, they actually called me. He passed on a Saturday. They called me that Monday and said, we've reviewed your documents, your power of attorney. We're going to approve them now at the bank. I said, well, there's no need to approve them now because he's passed away. I'll have the probate paperwork for you in a couple of weeks. And so they had, in the end, approved it. But by the time they approved it, he had already passed. So that's why it's important to have the documents done the right way so that you don't have to deal with those things when you're in the midst of a situation. And to be quite honest, it would have been difficult if I hadn't had the money to pay for a lot of different things. And if I hadn't had him with his binder and his life insurance to be able to pay for his funeral expenses and things of that nature, if I hadn't had the ability to do that myself, it would have been difficult. And, I'm thinking about, and hopefully I'll talk to Mr. Washington. You might get a call from me if you ever are watching this live stream, to get some folks from the funeral homes to talk about what that means. Because if it's, I believe that there's a life insurance policy out there, but we can't find it, that can't hold up somebody being able to be funeralized because, you have to have that document. If you have it, the one that my dad put in his binder, I took that over to Robbins Brothers. Mr. Washington helped me to plan. He was very upset because he went on vacation, which he needed. Go on vacation. You need it. You need a break. So he wasn't there for the actual funeral for my father, but he helped me plan everything. And all they had to do is go onto a website and for the life insurance policy, and I didn't have to do anything else. I just had to sign one piece of paper, and that covered everything that needed to be covered. So being organized, having that binder is going to be very helpful for you as you go forward. Let me see. I think I answered the question. She said, okay, thanks. Thank you. Let me see. I have some other things that I want to make sure that I talk to you about. Here's one. If you are somebody who only has a cell phone and haven't had a house phone in a long time, you are not prepared. You probably still get some spam calls, but I'm going to tell you this now. Your mother, your grandmother, if they still have a house phone, the spam calls are all day, every day. It's ridiculous. And I have told my mom multiple times that the phrase, I've written it down, I do not consent to telephonic communication. Please remove my number. That's it. Don't get in a conversation with them. The people on the phone are not actual people. They are AI. Don't yell at them. Don't start talking to them and say where you're coming from and who are you and everything else. But literally, at least every half hour, my mom gets a spam phone call on her house phone, on her landline phone. And the first time that actually came into play for me was at the hospital in Kalamazoo at Bronson after my mother had her knee surgery. There was a call to the landline in the hospital room. And I picked it up and they started talking about Medicare and were asking for my mother's personal information. And it almost got me because I figured we're in the hospital. But I said, well, now, where are you calling from? What department in the hospital? Because they don't even know that they're calling the hospital. So after a while, I said, I'll call back. And I hung up. And I went outside to the nurse's station and I said, should they be calling and getting personal information over the phone in regards to like Medicare? Because at that time we were trying to determine if my mom was going to be able to go home and, after surgery or whatever the case may be. And they were like, that's a spam call. I said, they get spam calls at the hospital? And they said, yeah, they get spam calls there too. So you please be careful. If your loved one goes to the hospital and you get a phone call, you need to verify everything with the nurse's station before you give out any personal information over the phone. And, we're at kind of have smaller hospitals around here. But at some of the larger hospitals, if you're at Grady or Emory in Atlanta, it might not be strange for somebody from billing department to call you because, if you're at Piedmont, whatever, there might be multiple different locations. But they get spam calls too. If they have a landline, you cannot stop it. And so, now the website you used to be able to go on, the do not call registry, it means nothing anymore. I don't know what happened as to why. We're all supposed to register our numbers on it. But even my dad's phone that he took his landline and made it a cell phone, it's still, I get spam calls all the time. So our baby boomers and older, there's going to be spam calls. So you need to, number one, make sure that they're not giving out personal information. My mom knows, and now she'll say, you got to talk to my daughter. And I've changed a lot of stuff to text me or to call me. But some of that stuff that comes to the landline, you cannot. So you need to make sure that they're not giving information over these spam calls. And my mom cannot distinguish that it's AI. Like, I'll put it on speakerphone and it'll be a voice saying, hello, hello. And she'll be like, this girl called. I said, Mom, that's a computer. She doesn't understand that that's AI that just calls people over and over again. They record voices, they use voices. My mom has gotten the call that I've been arrested, that family members have been arrested, and you need to give us money for bail or bond. I've told her I'm not going to be. And, one of the times that she said it was me, like there was somebody crying in the background that she was like, she thought it could be me. So she called me and I said, Mom, if I got arrested, I wouldn't be crying. I'd be mad. But, and sometimes I do tell her I have a hearing today where the judge may get mad at me. So have the contempt money ready, but it's never actually happened. But, they get those kind of calls all the time. And so if you're dealing with a situation with a family member who is at home for a period of time, or even if they do have somebody that's there with them, they still may be answering the phone and talking to these different AIs that are recording their voice and stuff. It's hard to stop them. You cannot stop them. But the phrase that I always give when I answer the phone when I'm there, because usually when I'm there, even if I'm there for half an hour, I get one or two calls. I do not consent to telephonic communication. Please remove my number. Do not get into a back and forth, because they will then use your voice to then call places and say that they are, that person, and be able to try to do something nefarious. So be very careful about spam calls. The other issue that I deal with now is mail. So I had my dad's mail transferred to my home, and it is very triggering. I'm going to be honest with you, because again, that baby boomer generation gets a lot of mail, a lot of magazines, ARP, for my dad, American Legion, and all these other things. And I get it all the time, because I did a permanent change of address. By the way, in order to do that, once somebody passes, the post office is going to ask you for a death certificate and a letter of authority. The letter of authority comes from the court. If you do not have to probate an estate, then you need to fill out the document that says, I'm not going to have a letter of authority. If you had a trust, or there wasn't enough where you had a small estate, or you didn't need to do any estate paperwork, or it's a spouse that passed and, the other spouse automatically gets everything, so you don't have to probate it, but you need to change the mail for one reason or another, you have to explain to them. You might have to actually ask to speak to the postmaster. There is no letter of authority. And you cannot do that online. You can do the forwarding online and request to forward it, but they may ask you to actually bring in those documents. So that's another thing. But I was able to do that. I brought the letter of authority. But it is honestly, even still now, sometimes when I get mail and even when you call them and tell them my father has passed, I still get like credit card offers and, all kinds of different things. And it's really difficult. It's something that I didn't expect would be something that would be triggering for me. But, I get a lot of mail in my dad's name because older generations get a whole lot of mail. I don't get as much mail to the law office, maybe, but not personal mail, but they get a lot of mail. And so you do have to deal with that every time that you have to deal with forwarding. The other thing, some things like newspapers and stuff do not forward. So you want to make sure that you are addressing that. I'm not going to get into my whole issue with the Herald Palladium locally and my dad's subscription forwarding, and then trying to renew my mom's subscription. But that's a whole nother thing. Some things, magazines, different things, if you want those things to keep coming, they don't forward the same way that regular mail does. Let me see. Here is a tip that was very helpful for me with my dad. My dad did not use online accounts for anything. He paid a lot of stuff by cash, drive around and pay all the stuff by cash. So when I was trying to get access to stuff before I had the letter of authority, because I had his social security number and I had the other things, I created online accounts for him. So even for the bank, I was able to, when the bank wouldn't let me get access, I created an online account because he had never had one, and I was able to access that information with my power of attorney. And for a lot of different bills and things, to be able to see if the bills were due, the power company, things of that nature. Even getting online and being able to pay his water bill and sewage bill and different things. I created online accounts because my parents my mom hadn't created them for some of hers, which I was able to do while she was in the hospital with the stroke or in rehab from the stroke, as well as for my father. That was a way for me to be able to get access to things because I created those online accounts. Looks like I might have a question. So I want to ask, what is a letter of authority? Good. Thank you for bringing that up. So once somebody passes away in Michigan, if you have to open a full estate with a Michigan probate court, and you request to be the personal representative. They used to call it the executor or executrix if you're a woman. That's the older language. In Michigan, it's personal representative. Some states still use executor, but they give you a letter, and it's a one-page letter that says you are the person who is designated in order to be able to make the decisions after a person has passed. So in a deceased estate, it is called a letter of authority. In Michigan, if you have a guardianship or a conservatorship, you also have a letter of guardianship and you have a letter of conservatorship. They actually all look alike. So, when you take those to the bank or take those to the post office or other places, you need to, they're going to read it and try to make sure they have the right one. But in Michigan, the authority to be able to act on somebody else's behalf is a letter of authority, a letter of guardianship, or a letter of conservatorship. You have to submit the documents to the court reviews it, and then the court signs that letter and puts the stamp and seal from the court on there. You cannot get that any other way but going to the court. If you're using a power of attorney or a medical directive that somebody is signing in estate planning and you haven't gone to the probate court, then those documents are to be notarized. In Michigan, a medical directive only needs 2 signatures because a lot of times people do those in the hospital. But with the power of attorney, it has to be witnessed by 2 people and notarized. So the letter of authority is notarized or authorized by the court. If you have the other documents, then you need 2 witnesses and have a notary be able to sign it. And, this happens a lot in Berrien County. That needs to be somebody in Michigan, but it doesn't always have to be. So if you have a South Bend notary, they can say, I'm acting on behalf. There's a lot of different things that can happen, but it either has to be notarized or authorized by a court. So that letter of authority comes from the court. The other important thing to discuss with that is that you have to sign an acceptance. So a lot of times I will do estate planning for people and they've appointed their daughter or their son-in-law or somebody to be able to act on their behalf, but they live in Indiana or California or Texas or Georgia. And I send them the documents and I say, you need to sign this and send it back to me. That is important because before you can act on a power of attorney or a medical directive, you have to sign that acceptance to say, I'm going to do what's in the best interest of this person. And if I don't, I can be in trouble. I can be charged with a crime. I can be sued. You have to sign that acceptance. And some banks and different things will not give you the authority, even if you have the document, if you don't have a signed acceptance. If you have a trust, you have to sign an acceptance of trust. So if your parents have a trust and you're the next trustee, if something happens to them, you should have had and signed a paper that says this is the acceptance of the trust. And if you don't have that, then you need to get a copy of it from the person who created your documents, or go to one of these companies and say, I need an, will and trust or LegalZoom, and say, I need an acceptance letter to be able to sign. But that is an important part of estate planning that needs to be done. So a lot of what I do in estate planning is getting emails for the kids and saying, here are the documents. I need you to sign this, and I need you to send it back to me. Because if your parents forget it, or you forget about it, or you don't have it in the cloud, at least I will have it, so that I can, be able to show that this person has signed an acceptance. And I have been asked for, acceptances that people signed 10, 11, 12 years ago. So it is very important that you have those acceptance documents if you're doing power of attorney documents. Just as was asked about the probate court, you also have to sign an acceptance for those things as well. So that acceptance says, I understand what my duty is, and I understand that if I violate that duty, then I can be civilly liable or criminally liable, depending on, the nature. And that happens. Just because you have power of attorney, I have power of attorney for my mother right now. I can't just go drain her accounts. That's not in her best interest. I can't go spending the money on stuff for myself, even if she wanted me to. My mom will say, oh, go buy something for Oprah or my cat. I'll pay for this, I'll pay for that. I still am very careful about keeping receipts and everything else of that nature, because, I take out money to be able to get her food or, do different things. I track all of that, because just because you're the power of attorney, the conservator, the guardian, you can't just do what you want to do. And that's really hard. And I have a lot of people who deal with that right now. You become the guardian, you become the power of attorney, and you go to the doctor, and they're asking your parent or your sibling what they want to do, and it's not what you think needs to be done. It's not what you want. If they're at a point where they can make some of those decisions themselves, then the doctors are going to give them some agency. So that's what I'm dealing with right now with my mom. My mom has actually recovered very well from the stroke. She does have some permanent damage and some things that she cannot do, and still needs some assistance. But, my mom wants to be a part. She wants to be able to give. Now, I might have to give the list of medications. She can't always remember that. But, I have to let my mom have agency. You may be able to assist someone. You might have the documents in order to assist them. But if they are able to have agency, you have to give it to them. And some doctors, the banks, different things, they're gonna say, yeah, we get it. We know that you have the documents. We know the court has given you this ability, but we are still going to give agency to this person. And so that can be very difficult. My mom knows I'm not going to go against what the doctors are telling me that I need to be doing for her, even if she doesn't like it. But, that's part of what my duty is. If I went against that and said, oh, that's okay, go ahead and do this anyway, and then something happens, I'd be liable. And, at the same time, if she believes I don't want to take this medication, I don't want to do this thing, I need to respect that. Even if I may think something else is better for her, I can't just do stuff without considering what it is that she wants and her agency. And so that is something that if you're doing long-term caregiving, your power of attorney for a long period of time, you need to be able to have discussions about. My mother had a credit card that she had set up with the bank to just pay off, like pay a certain amount from her checking account every month to it. So it had a balance on it. Not a very high balance, but I said, Mom, if we just paid this credit card off, then you're not going to be paying interest. And this is how much money you would be saving on interest and everything else. And when I first brought it to her, she was like, no, I don't want to do it. I want to leave it the way that I got it. That's the way I've been doing it for 30 years. Okay, fine. And so then I waited a couple of months, and then I came back and I said, see, Mom, see how you got charged this money, and you don't need to, because we could just transfer this money. And finally she was like, okay, fine, you can do it. I could have done it without her approval the first time because I had the power of attorney, but I waited and talked to her about it and showed it to her and had the discussion with her, and then made the decision to do it. So you still have to give the person their agency. And the way that is really hard, in using my father's example, is I knew my dad wanted to go home. First thing when I got back from that vacation and got from Detroit to Benton Harbor in about an hour and a half, don't ask me how I did it. I don't know. Um, and got into that room, the first thing my dad told me is, I want to go home. And I knew there were treatments. I knew there were different things that could be done. Um, but I knew what my dad wanted. And so I had to make that decision, even though that's not what I wanted to do. I needed to do what I knew he wanted. And this was probably the most difficult thing. The palliative care nurse at the hospital was amazing. She was probably my favorite person who I had contact with. I cannot think of her name right now, but she was a long-standing nurse, and she was the palliative care nurse at Corwell St. Joe. And she talked with us and would just hang out in the room and talk with us for 30 minutes, an hour at a time, talk with my family, everything else. But I came, and I think it was like a Tuesday. My dad went home on a Wednesday. I signed the paperwork for hospice because that was the way for me to be able to get my dad home and not have to go to a facility. He wanted to go home. And I knew, like, I have talked with hospice. I knew the whole thing. But when I tell you, I was down the hall with the hospice people signing the paperwork. I didn't do it in the room with dad because, I was having different discussions. When I tell you, by the time I signed the paper, this was maybe a 20-minute meeting. I'd already gone over all the paperwork and walked down the hall. They had disconnected everything from my dad. And that shocked me, even though I knew that that's what I had just signed. Even trying to get his electrolytes and stuff back up, they took that off because they said when you sign the hospice paperwork, it's about making him comfortable. And I went off a little bit. It's the only time I went off at the hospital. But I said, no, hook the electrolytes back up to him because he can't go home until tomorrow because we have to do the transport and get all the transport and everything else done. And they were like, no, you signed the hospice paperwork. And I had to advocate in that situation because I said, if you're not letting him go home tonight and he's still going to be here for another, 24 hours, then he needs these things. I understand you are making him comfortable, but it was shocking for me to literally walk down the hall from signing that paperwork and everything had been disconnected. And this is somebody, like I said, who has been doing estate planning, who's done probate, who has been there for my clients in these situations at certain times. But for it to be my dad, I was shocked. But I knew my dad wanted to go home. And he was happy that they had taken all the stuff off of him. And he was like, what time am I going home? And I said, Dad, we still got to get some other stuff together to get home. And when my dad got home, he said, everything's okay. And that's what he wanted. And so even though that might not have been all of what I wanted, I had to do, and I knew that my job as the power of attorney, as the person that my dad had designated, was to do what he wanted as long as it was in his best interest. And he did not want to be in that hospital. And I did what he wanted. But you can still advocate. And they did. They brought some of the things back that I had asked for. But you have to do it in a way. And it goes back to my very first point about knowing who you are and knowing if you're the right person for this role. If you're not somebody who can do that, if you're not somebody who can advocate without yelling and screaming and getting kicked out of the hospital and getting the police called and everything else, if you can't do that, then have somebody else do it. Even if that's your parent's friend, maybe it's not you that does it. Even if it's the youngest sibling or the middle sibling and not the oldest sibling, start having these discussions and conversations now, because the biggest part of this is have the discussion. Last thing I want to show you all before I end today is, in Michigan, at least, there is this thing called the funeral representative designation. And this is a fairly new document, has been around for maybe almost 10 years now, but many of us as estate planners had not used it as much. But I have found more and more that people want this document. And so, in addition to the power of attorney and other things, this can allow somebody to be able to plan your funeral, even if you don't do a full will. Because remember, the power of attorney ends at death. The medical directive ends at death. But this document, the funeral representative, can allow somebody to plan your funeral. So even if you're like, I'm not ready to do a will yet, but if something happens to me, I want this person to be able to take care of my arrangements. This is something that is a document that I'm going to start including, that I have started including in my estate planning documents, and plan to have more discussion about. And hopefully, like I said, we'll be able to get some other folks in here to have a discussion with you all about what this document means and how it can become an important part of your estate plan. But thank you all for, being with me today. And, I got through it. And I'm thankful to my family. That's the reason I was a little bit late getting on today, because my family was able to gather today at my dad's house and, be together, because that's the other part of it. It's just, I had a timeline, and I knew what I wanted to have my office open in dedication to my dad by the day that he passed. But that was a timeline that I put on myself. One of the biggest things that people tell me I'm not doing well, but I promise you I actually am. I'm getting closer and closer to being able to take more time and take a break. Because even with my father's passing being a year ago, I'm still caretaking for my mother. So it's just it is uh, constant anxiety, constant fight or flight, and you need support. And so I'm thankful to my family for being support for me today, and ongoing support. My mother's friends, my father's friends, my friends have been amazing. You need that. But I know that in this past year and a half, this has made me a different estate planning attorney and probate attorney, because of the personal things that I have gone through. And so I'm hoping that some of the tips and tricks that I've given you, be careful about spam phone calls, be careful about mail that can be triggering, have the discussions, get yourself your different colored folders so people can find it, and then put the stuff in there, so that you can be able to access it. I hope that some of those things have been helpful. Advocate with the bank, explain it to them again. Don't just let them tell you no. Um, and I'll have more information over the next couple of months. I'm hoping to do, at least here in Michigan, in person, an estate planning conference where I get all the people together: life insurance, funeral homes, estate planning attorneys, pastors, to talk about some of the grieving process. Ranika, RJ, if you're watching at any point, I will be able to pull you in as part of this too, because I just want this process to be easier for people. It's never going to be easy. It's very hard. But, if you can have all the supports around you, hopefully we can be able to help each other get through this. Let me make sure I don't have any additional questions. Just thanks for the information. Thank you. Thank you to the community. So I will be back at the end of April. I have not picked my topic yet. I think I might try to bring back, if I can figure out how to do it. I used to, on the radio show, do a poll and let you all pick the topic. So if I can figure out how to do that, because it doesn't have that option, I don't think, anymore on Facebook. You guys might have to go to YouTube in order to do it. But I'm going to figure out a way to be able to do a poll with two options and let you all pick the topic. So look out for that starting in April. And again, thank you all. I want to dedicate this show to my dad, and also my cousin Janaea. So pray for my family. My cousin Emlyn, who recently passed, be going to her funeral on the 4th. There's been a lot of loss in this season. And so we really do need to support each other, not just in the legal aspect of helping people through that process, but just supporting and loving on each other. So please do that and pray for each other. You never know what somebody is going through. You really don't. And that is another thing I've learned over this year and a half. So let's be kind to each other. Let's help support each other. And let's do what we can to help people through the grieving process. All right, I'm going to end my stream now. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.